There is something beneath the floor of everything you have ever believed to be real, not a metaphor, not a philosophical suggestion, something literal, something that quantum mechanics has measured, that ancient wisdom traditions mapped in symbols and stone thousands of years before the first laboratory existed, and that most human beings will walk past every single day of their entire lives without ever once suspecting it is there. You are not most people. Something brought you here. Something in you that has always felt the thinness of the surface. Something that has looked at the world everyone agrees is solid and real and permanent and felt. Not with your mind, but with something deeper than your mind. That what you are seeing is a layer, a skin stretched over something vast, a surface that conceals a depth so profound that the moment you begin to see beneath it, the world you thought you understood becomes something else entirely. That feeling is not imagination. It is not wishful thinking. It is not the symptom of a mind that refuses to accept ordinary reality. That feeling is accurate perception. And today, we are going to follow it down. What you are about to discover has been hidden in plain sight. Not hidden by conspiracy, not locked in vaults or suppressed by institutions, though institutions have certainly preferred that you not look too closely. Hidden the way the deepest layer of a canyon is hidden, not because someone covered it, but because you have to be willing to descend past every comfortable surface to reach it. Hidden the way the quantum field is hidden beneath what you call matter. Not absent, not theoretical, but simply beneath the frequency at which most human perception operates. The question is not whether this hidden layer exists. Physics has already answered that question. The question is whether you are ready to see it. And the fact that you are here tells me something. Most people will never find this layer. They will live their entire lives at the surface of reality, moving through a world that feels solid and fixed and finished, accepting the explanations they were handed, never asking what lies beneath the explanation itself. They will eat and sleep and work and worry and love and grieve entirely within the outermost membrane of what reality actually is. And they will call that membrane the whole thing. But there is a layer beneath that. There is always a layer beneath that. Let me show you what is underneath. Begin here. Begin with something you think you know. Begin with the thing you are most certain is real, most certain is fixed, most certain is beyond question. Begin with matter. Begin with the solid world. Begin with the floor beneath your feet, the walls around you, the body you inhabit, the atoms that compose everything you have ever touched, or seen, or called real. You know what matter is. Everyone knows what matter is. It is the stuff of the physical world. It is solid. It is measurable. It is the foundation of the reality you navigate every day. You have been told this since you were old enough to understand language. The world is made of matter. Matter is real. Matter is solid. Matter is the baseline of existence. That is the surface understanding. Now let me show you what is underneath it. In the early 20th century, physicists did something that should have permanently and irreversibly altered humanity's relationship with reality. They looked beneath matter. They took the thing everyone assumed was the foundation, the solid, physical, undeniable stuff of the world, and they looked at what it was made of. And what they found there was not smaller solid things. What they found there was not a more fundamental version of the same solidity. What they found was the opposite of solid. They found that beneath the surface of matter, at the quantum level, the building blocks of everything that exists do not behave like objects. They do not have fixed positions. They do not have definite properties. They do not exist as solid, located, determined things until the moment they are observed. Before observation, a quantum particle exists as a wave of probability, a spread of all the possible states it could be in, all the possible places it could be located, all the possible properties it could have, existing simultaneously as pure potential, not metaphorically, not approximately, literally. The electron that orbits the nucleus of every atom in your body does not have a location until it is measured. It exists as a probability distribution, a quantum superposition of all the places it could be. The moment it is measured, the moment observation occurs, the wave function collapses. The infinite probability resolves into a single actuality. The potential becomes particular. The wave becomes a particle. And then, this is the part that changes everything. The moment observation ceases, the particle dissolves back into probability, back into the wave, back into the field of infinite potential. The solid world is not solid at its foundation. The foundation of matter is a quantum field of pure possibility that only resolves into apparent solidity when consciousness observes it. This is not belief. This is what quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter. This is what the double-slit experiment demonstrated. This is what the measurement problem in quantum physics has been wrestling with for over a century. This is what the Copenhagen interpretation, the many worlds interpretation, the relational interpretation, all the competing frameworks for understanding quantum reality, are all grappling with in their different ways. The surface says, reality is solid, fixed, and independent of observation. The depth says, reality is a field of probability that participates with consciousness in the act of becoming. That is the first layer beneath what you thought you knew, and we are only just beginning. But here is what is strange. Here is what should make you stop and sit with this for a moment before we go deeper. This discovery was made over 100 years ago. The experiments were done. The mathematics was verified. The implications were understood. Or at least the physicists who discovered them understood that the implications were staggering. Niels Bohr said that anyone who is not shocked by quantum mechanics has not understood it. Richard Feynman said that nobody understands quantum mechanics, meaning not that it is wrong, but that what it reveals is so far outside the surface understanding of reality that the human mind trained on surface reality cannot fully metabolize it. And yet the world continued mostly as it was. The surface understanding of reality remained the dominant operating assumption of civilization. the schools did not change what they taught about the nature of the world. The cultural story of solid, fixed, independent reality did not dissolve. Most people went on living as though the quantum layer did not exist. Why? Because the quantum layer was kept in the laboratory. It was handed to specialists. It was translated into equations that the average person was told were too complex to understand. It was cordoned off behind the language of professional physics and left there. A revolution that happened in the basement while everyone upstairs continued living by the old story. The surface stayed the surface. The depth was acknowledged as real and then quietly set aside. But there is a layer beneath that. There is a layer beneath the question of why the quantum discovery did not change everything. And when we look at it, we find something extraordinary. The reason the quantum layer did not change the surface understanding of reality is not primarily because the mathematics was complex. It is because what quantum mechanics discovered beneath the surface of matter is not just a scientific fact. It is a map, and the map was already drawn. The map had already been drawn thousands of years before the first physicist aimed an electron at a slit in a barrier. Ancient wisdom traditions across every culture, every continent, every epoch of human civilization before the modern era drew this map. They drew it without instruments. They drew it without equations. They drew it from the inside, from direct experiential investigation of the nature of consciousness and reality. And what they mapped is structurally, functionally, almost point for point, identical to what quantum mechanics discovered from the outside. This is where the veil lifts. This is where the layer beneath the quantum layer begins to reveal itself. If this transmission is reaching something in you, if something in you is recognizing what is being uncovered here, take a moment to like this video and subscribe so we can keep descending together. The Vedantic tradition of ancient India described the material world, what they called Maya, as a layer of apparent solidity stretched over a deeper reality of pure consciousness. Brahman, the ultimate ground of being in Vedantic philosophy, is not a thing. It is not a substance. It is the field from which all apparent things arise and into which they dissolve. It is described as Sat Chit Ananda, being, consciousness, bliss, a formless field of pure awareness that is the actual foundation of what appears as the material world. Sound familiar? A formless field of pure potential from which apparent material reality arises and into which it resolves. The Tao Te Ching of ancient China describes the Tao, the foundational principle of reality, as something that cannot be named, cannot be fixed, cannot be grasped as an object. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The nameable is the mother of 10,000 things. Beneath the named, fixed, apparent world of 10,000 things, there is an unnameable ground that is the source of all of them. The Sufi mystics of the Islamic tradition spoke of al-Haq, the real, as distinct from the apparent world of forms. The apparent world is a veil over the real, not a lie but a surface that conceals a depth. The Hermetic tradition, encoded in the texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, described the principle of mentalism. The universe is mental, held in the mind of the all, not metaphorically mental. Literally, the structure of reality is consciousness-based. The apparent solidity of the world is a projection within a field of mind. The indigenous traditions of the Americas, of Africa, of Australia, every ancient knowledge system that preserved its original depth before the surface world of modernity flattened it, described reality as alive, responsive, participatory, not a fixed machine operating by mechanical laws, but a living field that responds to consciousness, that participates in the act of perception, that is not separate from the one who observes it. They were describing the quantum field. They were describing the observer effect. They were describing the collapse of the wave function. They were describing it in the language of direct experience rather than the language of mathematics. But the structure of what they were pointing at is the same structure quantum mechanics discovered with instruments and equations. The ancient ones mapped this hidden layer long before instruments existed. And this convergence, this meeting of the oldest human wisdom and the newest human science at the same hidden layer of reality, is not coincidence. It is not a vague similarity that can be explained away. It is a confirmation. It is what happens when two completely different investigative methods, the external method of scientific measurement and the internal method of contemplative exploration, both go deep enough. When you go deep enough from the outside and deep enough from the inside, you arrive at the same layer. The surface tells you that science and ancient wisdom are opposites. The depth tells you they are the same map drawn by different hands. Now let me take you deeper, because there is a layer beneath even this convergence. And it is the layer that changes not just what you think about reality, but what you do with reality, what you are capable of within it. Pause here for a moment. Before we go further, I want you to feel what has already shifted. You came into this transmission with a surface understanding of reality, a world of solid objects, fixed laws, independent existence, a world where what you see is what there is. And in the first layer beneath that surface, you found a quantum field of pure probability that only resolves into apparent solidity through the act of observation, a reality that participates with consciousness, a foundation that is not solid, but is instead a shimmering, dynamic, infinite field of potential. And beneath that, you found that this is not news, that the oldest human knowledge systems already knew this, that the veil between quantum mechanics and ancient wisdom is not a barrier, it is a membrane, and it dissolves the moment you look at both of them from deep enough. Feel what that does to the story you have been living inside. Because here is the thing, here is the layer that most people never reach, even the ones who learn about quantum mechanics, even the ones who study ancient wisdom traditions, the layer that changes everything. If reality is a quantum field of pure probability that participates with consciousness in the act of becoming, then consciousness is not a passenger in reality. Consciousness is not a late arrival in a universe that was already fixed and finished before awareness showed up. Consciousness is not an epiphenomenon, a side effect of matter, a ghost produced by the brain, a brief flicker of subjectivity in a vast mechanical darkness. Consciousness is the instrument through which the quantum field resolves into reality. This is the layer that was hidden beneath the quantum layer. This is what the ancient wisdom traditions were pointing at when they said the universe is consciousness. This is what the observer effect in quantum mechanics is actually showing us. Not just that observation affects measurement. That would be a small technical fact about experimental methodology. But that observation is the mechanism by which potential becomes actual. That awareness is the process by which the infinite becomes particular. You are not observing a reality that exists independently of you. You are participating in the process by which reality becomes, and that changes everything. But there is a layer beneath that. There is always a layer beneath that, because knowing this as a concept is one thing. Knowing it as a lived experience is something else entirely. And there is a vast distance between those two things. A distance that most people who discover the quantum layer never cross. They learn the information. They find it fascinating. They tell other people about it. And then they go back to living on the surface, because the surface is where the habits are, where the conditioning is, where the grooves of ordinary perception run so deep that even knowing about the quantum layer does not automatically change the frequency from which you observe. This is the most important layer. This is the one that matters. Because the quantum field is not something you need to travel to. It is not something you access through a special technique or a particular technology or a specific set of beliefs. It is the ground beneath every moment you have ever lived. It is the layer beneath every experience, every thought, every sensation, every ordinary and extraordinary moment of your existence. It has been there the entire time. The veil between you and the quantum layer of reality is not a wall. It is not a barrier made of ignorance or unworthiness or insufficient spiritual development. It is a membrane of attention. It is the thin film of habitual, surface-level perception that keeps your awareness focused on the outermost layer of what is actually happening. And the membrane dissolves the moment your awareness is ready to look through it. You are already seeing through it. That is what I want you to understand. The fact that you are here, that something in you responded to this transmission, that you have felt throughout your life the thinness of the surface, the sense that there is more beneath what you can see. That is not a feeling you manufactured. That is the quantum layer pressing up against your awareness from below. That is the deeper reality making itself known through the only channel available to it, your own perception. You have always been seeing through the veil. You just did not know what you were seeing. Let me show you something. Let me show you a layer that has been hidden in plain sight in the structure of your own experience. Think about the last time you were fully present, not thinking about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow, not planning, not replaying, not rehearsing. Fully here, fully in the moment. Maybe it was in nature, watching water move or light change. Maybe it was in a moment of deep connection with another person. Maybe it was in the middle of something that demanded every bit of your attention and left no room for the noise of ordinary mental activity. In that moment, what did you notice? If you have had that experience, and you have, even if it was brief, even if you did not recognize it at the time, you may have noticed something that is very difficult to describe. A quality of aliveness in things, a sense that the world was more present, more vivid, more there than it usually is. A feeling of rightness, of fit, of being exactly where you were supposed to be. A kind of stillness that was not empty but full of something that you could feel but not name. That was not imagination. That was not a mood. That was not your nervous system settling down, though it may have been that too. That was the quantum layer becoming perceptible. In the moments when the noise of surface-level mental activity quiets, when the constant chatter of past and future falls away, when awareness collapses into the pure singularity of the present moment. In those moments, the membrane between your ordinary perception and the quantum field becomes thin, and what you feel pressing through that membrane is the actual nature of reality, the aliveness that is the ground of all apparent things, the field of pure potential that is always there, always humming, always available, always the actual foundation of the world you are walking through. Most people have touched this layer accidentally, in moments of crisis that stripped away all mental noise, in moments of beauty that stopped thought completely, in moments of love so complete that the boundary between self and world dissolved, in moments of meditation or prayer or deep contemplation when the surface fell away. And then the moment passed. The surface reasserted itself. The mental noise returned, and the experience was filed away as something beautiful, something unusual, something that happened to them rather than something that revealed the actual nature of what is always happening. But there is a layer beneath that filing. There is a layer beneath the experience of that moment being exceptional. What if it was not exceptional? What if those moments of quantum clarity were not departures from ordinary reality, but arrivals at actual reality? What if the surface, the noisy, scattered, past and future obsessed surface of ordinary experience, is the departure? What if the ground state of your consciousness, the natural resting frequency of your awareness, when it is not being pulled in 100 directions by habit and conditioning, is the quantum layer? What if you are not trying to reach something you have never been? What if you are trying to return to what you have always been beneath the surface? This is where the ancient wisdom traditions and quantum mechanics converge most powerfully. This is the deepest layer of the map they both drew. The Vedantic teaching of Tat Tvam Asi, that art thou, points at the identity between the individual consciousness and the ground of all being. Not that you are connected to the quantum field, not that you have access to the quantum field, that you are the quantum field, that the awareness through which reality resolves into particularity is not separate from the awareness you are using right now to read these words. That the observer at the quantum level and the observer you experience yourself to be are not two different things. The Zen traditions pointing at original nature, the face you had before your parents were born, is pointing at the same layer, before the surface of personality, before the conditioning, before the story you have been telling about who you are and what the world is. There is something that was never a surface. There is awareness itself, the pure fact of consciousness prior to its contents. The Sufi teaching of fana, the dissolution of the separate self into the divine reality, is pointing at the same layer. The veil between individual consciousness and the ground of all being is not a wall. It is a mistaken identity. It is the surface story of separation that conceals the depth of unity. What quantum mechanics found in the laboratory, what ancient wisdom found in the laboratory of direct experience, is the same thing. The apparent separation between the observer and the observed, between consciousness and matter, between the self and the world, is a surface phenomenon. It is the outermost layer. Beneath it is a field that does not recognize the division. The surface tells you that you are a separate consciousness looking at an independent world. The depth tells you that you are the field looking at itself. Now, let me tell you about Mira. Mira was a scientist, not a spiritual seeker, not someone who had ever felt drawn to ancient wisdom or metaphysical exploration. A physicist specifically, someone who had spent her entire adult life in the most rigorous possible relationship with the surface of reality, measuring it, testing it, building mathematical models of its behavior. She was brilliant at the surface. She understood the equations better than almost anyone in her field. She could derive the wave function from first principles in her sleep. She could explain the double-slit experiment with a precision that made other physicists admire her. But she did not feel it. She knew about the quantum layer the way you know about a country you have never visited. She had the map. She had the coordinates. She had read every account of what it was like to be there, but she had never been there herself. The quantum layer was, for Mira, a mathematical object, a set of equations that described the behavior of things too small to see. It was real in the sense that the equations were accurate. It was not real in the sense of being something she had any personal relationship with. And then one night, working alone in the laboratory long after everyone else had gone home, something happened that Mira could not put in a paper and could not describe in equations. She was running an experiment she had run dozens of times before, sending photons through a double slit and measuring the interference pattern on the detector screen, the usual demonstration of wave-particle duality, the usual confirmation that quantum particles behave as waves when not observed and as particles when they are. But this time, for reasons she could not afterward explain, she stopped looking at the data. She stopped analyzing. She stopped thinking about what the numbers meant or how they fit into the theoretical framework she had been working in. She just looked. She looked at the interference pattern on the screen, the bands of light and dark that represented the quantum field resolving into particular impacts, the visible record of probability becoming actuality. the footprint of the wave, function, collapse. And something in her, not her intellect, not her analytical mind, but something beneath that, recognized what she was looking at. She was not looking at data. She was looking at the process by which reality becomes real. She was looking at the moment of creation, not the Big Bang, not some distant cosmological event, but the moment of creation that happens at every point in the universe at every instant. The moment when the quantum field, the infinite sea of probability, resolves into the particular, into the actual, into the real. And she recognized with a certainty that had nothing to do with equations and everything to do with direct perception, that she was not separate from what she was observing. That the observer and the observed were participating in the same process. That her act of looking was not separate from the pattern on the screen. That consciousness and matter were not two different things meeting across a gap, but one process expressing itself in two apparently different ways. She sat with that for a long time. The laboratory was quiet. The equipment hummed. The interference pattern glowed on the screen. And then she understood why Bohr had said that anyone who is not shocked by quantum mechanics has not understood it. Not because the mathematics was shocking, because what the mathematics was pointing at was shocking. Because what the mathematics was pointing at was this: the world is not what it appears to be. The surface is not the whole thing, and beneath the surface there is something that changes everything about what it means to be a conscious being in a quantum universe. Mira never published a paper about that night. There was nothing to publish. No data, no measurements, no equations, just a shift in perception, just the membrane becoming thin, just the quantum layer pressing up against her awareness from below until it came through. But everything she did afterward was different, not because her science changed. Her equations were the same, her methodology was the same, her rigor was the same, but because she was no longer doing science from the surface. She was doing it from the depth. She was working with the quantum layer from within the quantum layer. And the science she produced from that place was unlike anything she had done before. The people who worked with her noticed something had changed. They could not name it. They said she seemed more present, more certain, more still, as though she had found a center of gravity that she had not had before. That is what happens when the membrane thins. That is what happens when the quantum layer becomes not just a concept, but an experience. You do not become less rigorous. You do not become less engaged with the world. You become more present to it, more capable within it, more grounded in the actual foundation of what it is, rather than the surface story about what it is. What hidden layer has recently become visible to you? Was there a moment when a pattern you had been living inside suddenly dissolved the instant you looked directly at it? A truth that was always there, waiting beneath the surface until you were ready to see it. Drop it in the comments. The depth is always worth naming, even imperfectly. Now let us go deeper, because there is a layer beneath the quantum layer that we have not yet reached. and it is the layer that the ancient wisdom traditions were most insistent about, the layer that quantum mechanics approaches but cannot fully describe in its own language, the layer that requires a different kind of knowing. We have established that beneath the surface of solid matter, there is a quantum field of pure probability. We have established that this field participates with consciousness in the act of becoming, that the observer effect is not a quirk of measurement, but a fundamental feature of how reality works. We have established that ancient wisdom traditions mapped this layer from the inside thousands of years before science found it from the outside. Now, what is beneath the quantum field? This is where quantum mechanics itself reaches its edge. This is where the equations point beyond themselves. This is where the language of physics becomes, in the words of Werner Heisenberg himself, something that sounds much more like the language of poetry or mysticism than the language of science. Beneath the quantum field, beneath the field of probability, beneath the wave function, beneath the layer where matter dissolves into pure potential, there is what the physicist David Bohm called the implicate order. Bohm was one of the most rigorous and unconventional physicists of the 20th century, a student of Einstein, a man who spent his career trying to understand what quantum mechanics was actually saying about the nature of reality, not just how to use its equations to make predictions. And what he arrived at, after decades of investigation, was this. The quantum field is not the deepest layer. The quantum field, the field of probability, the wave function, the sea of potential from which particles emerge and into which they dissolve, is itself a surface. It is the explicate order, the unfolded order, the layer of reality where things appear as separate, located, measurable. Beneath it is the implicate order, the enfolded order, the layer where what appears as separate in the explicate order is revealed as a single, undivided movement. Bohm used the metaphor of a hologram. In a hologram, every part of the film contains information about the whole image. If you cut a holographic film in half, you do not get half the image. You get the whole image, slightly less resolved. Every part enfolds the whole. The separateness of the parts is a surface phenomenon. The depth is wholeness. The implicate order is the holographic depth of reality. It is the layer where what appears as separate particles, separate objects, separate events, separate consciousnesses, is revealed as the unfolded surface of a single, undivided process. And beneath the implicate order, Bohm pointed at something he called the hollow movement, the undivided flowing movement of the whole of existence, which he said was beyond any description, beyond any model, beyond any conceptual framework, the ground of all being that is not a thing, not a field, not even a process in the ordinary sense, but the living totality from which all processes arise. This is the layer the mystics were pointing at. This is what the Vedantic tradition called Brahman. This is what the Tao Te Ching called the Tao. This is what the Sufi mystics called al-Haq. This is what the Hermetic tradition called the All. This is what every contemplative tradition that went deep enough eventually arrived at. A ground of being that is not a thing, but is the source of all things. Not a substance, but the source of all substance. Not a consciousness, but the source of all consciousness. Not hidden from you, not beyond you, not separate from you. The layer beneath the quantum layer is not something you need to travel to. It is the ground you are standing on right now. It is what you are made of. It is what everything is made of. It is the one thing that is actually here, appearing as the many things that seem to be here. The surface tells you that you are a separate self in a world of separate things. The quantum layer tells you that those separate things are probability waves in a field that participates with consciousness. The implicate order tells you that the field itself is a surface, that beneath it there is no separation, that beneath it the observer and the observed are one movement, that beneath it you and the world are not two things in relationship, but one thing expressing itself as relationship. And the holo movement, the living ground beneath all of that, is not something you can think your way to. It is something you can only be, because it is what you already are beneath every layer of surface identity, surface story, surface understanding. This is where the veil lifts completely. This is the deepest layer. This is what was always there, hidden beneath everything else. Let me offer you a practice now, not a technique for reaching somewhere you are not. A practice of recognition, of noticing what is already here beneath the surface. Find a moment of stillness. You do not need to close your eyes, though you may. You do not need to sit in a particular way or breathe in a particular pattern. You just need to shift the direction of your attention. Ordinarily, your attention moves outward. It moves toward objects, toward thoughts, toward sensations, toward the contents of experience. This is the surface direction of attention, the direction that keeps you at the outermost layer, moving from thing to thing, from thought to thought, from moment to moment on the surface. Now, gently, without forcing anything, let your attention turn inward, not toward the contents of your inner world, not toward thoughts or feelings or memories or plans, inward toward the fact of awareness itself, toward the simple, undeniable, prior to everything fact that you are aware. Not what you are aware of. The awareness itself. Notice that awareness is here. Notice that it does not have a location. Notice that it does not have a boundary. Notice that it is not a thing you can point to, but it is the most undeniable fact of your existence, more certain than anything you are aware of, because all those things could be doubted, could be illusions, could be surface appearances, but the awareness through which you would do the doubting cannot be doubted. It is the one thing that cannot be absent from your experience, because it is the condition of all experience. Now, rest in that, just for a moment. Rest in the bare fact of awareness. Notice what that is like. Notice the quality of it. Notice whether it feels like a thing with edges, or whether it feels more like a space. a space in which all the things of your experience arise and pass away. Notice whether the thoughts that appear in that awareness feel like they are you, or whether they feel more like weather patterns in the sky of your awareness, appearing, moving, dissolving, while the sky itself remains unchanged. Notice the stillness beneath the movement, the silence beneath the sound, the presence beneath the contents of presence. This is the quantum layer experienced from the inside. This is the implicate order, the hollow movement, the ground of being, not as a concept, but as the actual texture of your awareness right now. This is what the ancient wisdom traditions were pointing at when they said that the self is not the ego, not the personality, not the story, but the awareness in which all of those appear. This is what you are beneath the surface. And notice, this is important. Notice that this awareness is not something you achieved just now. It was here before you started the practice. It has been here throughout this entire transmission. It has been here throughout your entire life. Every experience you have ever had has happened within this awareness. Every thought, every feeling, every sensation, every moment of joy or grief or confusion or clarity, all of it has appeared within this awareness, moved through it, and dissolved back into it. The awareness was always here. You were always it. The surface story of being a separate self looking at an independent world was always happening within it, not instead of it. You have been seeing through the veil the entire time. You just did not know what you were seeing. Now let us go back to the quantum mechanics, because there is something here that most explanations of quantum physics leave out. A layer beneath the science that changes what the science means. The observer effect, the fact that quantum particles behave differently when observed than when not observed, has been described in various ways by various physicists and various popularizers of physics. Some describe it as a purely mechanical effect. The act of measurement necessarily disturbs the system being measured. Some describe it as a statistical phenomenon. The wave function is just a mathematical tool for calculating probabilities, not a description of actual physical states. Some describe it as evidence of a participatory universe. Consciousness is literally involved in the process by which potential becomes actual. But there is a layer beneath all of these interpretations, a layer that the interpretations themselves are pointing toward without quite reaching. The observer effect is not just a fact about quantum particles. It is a fact about the nature of the relationship between awareness and reality at every level of existence. Consider this. The quantum particle that exists as a wave of probability until observed. What is it before observation? It is not nothing. It is not absent. It is present as potential. It is present as possibility. It is present as the full range of what it could be, all held simultaneously in the quantum superposition. It is, in a word, free. Free of the fixity of the particular, free of the limitation of being this rather than that, free of the surface of actuality, dwelling in the depth of potentiality, And then observation happens, and the wave collapses, and the particle becomes this, here, now, with these properties. The infinite potential resolves into the particular actual. Now, think about your own experience. Think about a moment before a decision, a real decision, one that matters, one where multiple possibilities are genuinely open. Before you choose, you are in a superposition of sorts. You could go this way or that way. The future is a wave of probability. The outcome is not yet fixed. And then you choose, you observe, you collapse the wave function of your own life into a particular actuality. This is not just a metaphor. This is the same process operating at a larger scale. The quantum field is the foundation, but the principle, the participation of consciousness in the resolution of potential into actual, operates at every level of the system. The quantum layer is not separate from the human layer. The quantum layer is the foundation of the human layer. And the observer effect that quantum mechanics discovered at the subatomic level is the same observer effect that operates in every moment of your conscious life. You are always collapsing wave functions. You are always participating in the process by which potential becomes actual. Every moment of your experience is a moment of quantum collapse, of the infinite field of what could be resolving into the particular experience of what is, and the quality of your observation, the depth of your presence, the clarity of your awareness, the degree to which you are actually here, rather than scattered between past and future, determines the quality of the reality you collapse into. This is the layer that was hidden beneath the surface understanding of quantum mechanics. This is the layer that changes it from a fascinating scientific fact into a practical truth about how to live. The surface version of quantum mechanics says, particles behave strangely at the subatomic level. The depth version says, you are always participating in the creation of your reality, and the depth of your presence is the depth of your creative power. That is not mysticism. That is the logical extension of what the physics is actually showing us. But there is still a layer beneath that. There is always a layer beneath that. Because the depth of presence, the quality of observation you bring to the quantum field of your own life, is not primarily a matter of technique or practice or effort. It is a matter of where you are observing from. And most people are observing from the surface. What does it mean to observe from the surface? It means observing from the level of the conditioned mind. The mind that is always translating present experience through the filter of past experience. The mind that is always comparing what is happening now to what happened before, always projecting current patterns into anticipated futures, always interpreting the present through the lens of accumulated story. The conditioned mind is not wrong. It is not bad. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a surface, a layer of interpretation that sits between raw awareness and the quantum field. It is useful. It is necessary for navigating ordinary reality, but it is not the observer. It is not the awareness that collapses the wave function. It is itself a layer to be seen through. When you observe from the conditioned mind, you are observing from the surface, and the reality you collapse is the reality that matches the surface. The reality that confirms the story, that fits the pattern, that reproduces the familiar. The quantum field is infinite, but the conditioned mind is a narrow band filter. It can only receive the frequencies it is tuned to. It can only collapse the possibilities that match its existing map. When you observe from the depth, from the bare awareness beneath the conditioned mind, from the quantum layer of your own consciousness, something different becomes possible. The filter is gone. The narrow band opens. The full spectrum of the quantum field becomes available. This is why the ancient wisdom traditions place such emphasis on the quieting of the conditioned mind. Not because thought is bad, not because the past is irrelevant, but because the conditioned mind is a surface, and the most powerful observation happens from beneath the surface. Meditation, contemplation, prayer, the various practices of inner stillness that every wisdom tradition developed, they are all, at their core, practices of descending below the surface of the conditioned mind to the depth of bare awareness, practices of tuning the observer to the quantum frequency, practices of learning to observe from the layer that is actually in contact with the field, rather than from the surface that is always at one remove from it. And here is what happens when you do. Here is the layer that was hidden beneath all the other layers. When you observe from the depth of bare awareness rather than the surface of the conditioned mind, the quantum field does not just become more accessible, you become more recognizable to it. Or more precisely, the distinction between you and it begins to dissolve. Because the bare awareness you find beneath the conditioned mind is not a separate observer looking at the quantum field. It is the quantum field looking at itself. This is the deepest layer. This is what all the ancient wisdom traditions were pointing at from their various directions. This is what David Bohm was approaching when he talked about the hollow movement. This is what the mystics meant when they said that the self and the divine are not two. This is what quantum mechanics is pointing at when it shows us that the observer cannot be separated from the observed, that the act of observation is not a neutral recording of pre-existing facts, but a participation in the process of creation. The observer is not separate from the field. The observer is the field observing itself. Consciousness is not something that happens in the universe. Consciousness is what the universe is doing when it becomes aware of itself. You are not a consciousness in a quantum universe. You are the quantum universe being conscious. This is the layer beneath everything. This is what was always there, hidden beneath the surface of the world you thought you knew. Hidden not by conspiracy, not by suppression, not by anyone's intention to keep you from it, but by the simple fact that it is the deepest layer, the layer you reach only after peeling back every surface above it. And you are here. You are at this layer now. Feel what that means. Not as a concept, as a fact about your actual nature. You are not a separate self in a fixed world. You are the field of pure awareness through which reality becomes real. You are the quantum observer. You are the process of wave function collapse. You are the mechanism by which infinite potential resolves into particular experience. Every moment of your life has been this. Every moment you have ever experienced has been the quantum field, which is what you are, resolving into the particular reality of that moment. The surface story said you were a passenger. The depth truth is that you are the driver. Not in the sense of controlling outcomes with your thoughts. That is a surface misunderstanding of a deep truth. In the sense that your awareness is the instrument through which reality becomes. Now I want to go somewhere with this. Somewhere practical. Somewhere that takes this from the layer of deep truth and brings it into the layer of lived experience. Because the deepest layer is only complete when it is embodied, when it is not just understood, but lived, not just perceived, but practiced. Here is what this means for the way you move through your life. Most of the suffering that human beings experience, not the suffering that comes from genuine loss or genuine pain, but the chronic background suffering, the anxiety, the sense of inadequacy, the feeling of being at the mercy of circumstances. Most of that suffering happens at the surface. It happens in the conditioned mind. It happens in the layer of interpretation and story and projection, not in the actual present moment of experience. The conditioned mind takes the quantum field, which is pure potential, which is the infinite possibility of this moment, and it collapses it into the familiar, into the story it already knows, into the pattern it has already practiced, and then it suffers in that familiar, practiced pattern and calls the suffering reality. But it is not reality. It is a surface. It is the outermost layer, and beneath it, always, is the quantum field, the infinite potential of this moment, unwritten, unfinished, available. The practice, the actual practice, the one that changes things, is the practice of descending beneath the surface story to the quantum layer of the present moment, not once, not in a special meditation session, but as a continuous orientation, as a way of being in the world that is always, even in the midst of activity and engagement, and the full complexity of ordinary life, rooted in the depth rather than the surface. What does this look like practically? What does it feel like to move through the world from the quantum layer rather than the surface? It feels like presence, like the kind of presence that the people around you can feel, like the quality that Mira's colleagues noticed in her after that night in the laboratory, a stillness, a groundedness, a sense of being fully here rather than partially somewhere else. It feels like a different relationship with uncertainty. At the surface, uncertainty is threatening. The conditioned mind needs to know what is coming so it can prepare, control, manage. But from the quantum layer, uncertainty is the natural state of the field. It is not a problem. It is the condition of possibility. It is what allows the field to be anything rather than just what it has already been. It feels like a different relationship with other people. At the surface, other people are objects in your world, sources of approval or threat, mirrors of your own story, players in the drama of your conditioned narrative. From the quantum layer, other people are the same field you are, the same awareness, the same ground of being, expressing itself in a different particular form. The separation is a surface. The depth is shared. It feels like a different relationship with time. At the surface, time is a linear sequence of moments, and you are always either behind or ahead of where you should be, always measuring the distance between where you are and where you want to be. From the quantum layer, time is the medium in which the field unfolds. The present moment is not a thin slice between past and future. It is the only place the field is ever actually present. The past is a memory arising now. The future is an anticipation arising now. The now is not a moment. It is the only reality there is. This is not a new idea. This is the oldest idea. This is what every wisdom tradition that went deep enough arrived at. The present moment is not where you are right now as opposed to where you were or where you will be. The present moment is the quantum field. It is the only place where the field is actually real. Everything else is a surface projection. And the practice that changes everything, is the practice of collapsing into the present, not as an escape from the complexity of life, not as a retreat from engagement, but as the act of returning to the actual ground of reality, the act of observing from the depth rather than the surface, the act of bringing the full weight of your awareness to bear on this moment, this breath, this experience right now. When you do this, when you actually do this, not as a concept but as a practice, something happens that cannot be fully described but can be recognized. The quantum field becomes perceptible. The depth becomes available. The infinite potential of this moment becomes accessible in a way that it is not when you are living at the surface. Not because you have done something magical, not because you have accessed a special power or unlocked a hidden ability, but because you have descended to the layer where the field actually is. You have gone beneath the surface to the depth. And the depth has always been here, always been available, always been the actual ground of your existence. You were always here. You just did not know what here was. There is a teaching in the Zen tradition. A student asks the master, "What is enlightenment?" The master says, "When I am hungry, I eat. When I am tired, I sleep." The student is confused. That is ordinary life. That is what everyone does. The master says, "No. When most people eat, they are thinking about what they did yesterday or what they will do tomorrow. When most people sleep, they are worried about tomorrow or replaying today. When I eat, I eat. When I sleep, I sleep. The present moment is complete. Nothing is missing from it. Nothing needs to be added to it from the past or the future to make it real. That is the quantum layer. That is the implicate order. That is the hollow movement, expressing itself as the ordinary act of eating, of sleeping, of being here. The most profound spiritual truth and the most ordinary moment are the same layer. The depth is not somewhere else. It is here. It is always here. It is the depth of this moment, this breath, this awareness, hidden in plain sight, now. Before we reach the final layer, I want to address something that arises for many people when they encounter this depth. A question that is actually a very important question, even though it often comes dressed as doubt. The question is this: if reality is a quantum field of pure potential, if consciousness participates in the process by which potential becomes actual, if I am the field observing itself, then why is my life the way it is? Why have I experienced what I have experienced? Why is the world the way it is? Why is there suffering? Why is there limitation? Why is there pain? This is not a small question. It is one of the most important questions a human being can ask. And it deserves a real answer, not a surface-level reassurance. Here is the layer beneath the question. The quantum field is not a vending machine. It is not a wish fulfillment mechanism. It is not a system in which the right thoughts produce the right outcomes. That is a surface misunderstanding of a deep truth. A misunderstanding that has been widely promoted and has caused a great deal of harm to people who tried to apply it and found that reality did not cooperate. The deeper truth is this: the quantum field is the field of all possibility. But the process by which you participate in that field is not primarily a process of thought. It is a process of being, of the depth of presence you bring to your life, of the degree to which you are observing from the quantum layer rather than the surface, and the life you have lived, including the difficult parts, the painful parts, the parts that seem to contradict any notion of a participatory universe, that life has been happening at every layer simultaneously, at the surface layer of conditioned patterns and habitual responses, at the quantum layer of participation and collapse, at the implicate layer of deeper meaning and connection, at the ground of being where nothing is separate from anything else. The suffering is real. The limitation is real. The pain is real. These are not illusions to be dismissed. They are experiences that arise in the field. But they are not the whole field. They are not the deepest layer. They are layers to be moved through, not walls to be stopped by. And the practice of descending to the quantum layer, of observing from the depth of bare awareness, of collapsing into the present moment, does not make the difficult things disappear. It changes your relationship with them. It changes the layer from which you encounter them. It changes the quality of your presence within them. From the surface, difficulty is a problem. From the quantum layer, difficulty is a movement in the field. From the implicate order, difficulty is part of the undivided wholeness of what is. From the ground of being, nothing is separate from anything else, and the distinction between easy and difficult, pleasant and painful, wanted and unwanted, is a surface distinction that conceals a deeper unity. This does not mean suffering does not matter. It does not mean that working to reduce suffering in the world is unnecessary. It means that the work of reducing suffering in your own life and in the world is most powerful when it is done from the quantum layer, from the depth of presence, from the ground of actual reality rather than the surface of conditioned reaction. The most effective action in the world is not the action that comes from the most anxious surface-level effort. It is the action that comes from the deepest presence, from the quantum layer, from the stillness that is not absence of movement, but the ground from which movement arises. This is what the ancient wisdom traditions meant by acting from the Tao, by surrendering to the will of God, by moving in alignment with Dharma, not passivity, not resignation, but action that arises from the depth rather than the surface. Action that is rooted in the actual ground of reality rather than the conditioned story about reality. The world needs this, not just as a personal practice, as a way of being in the world that changes the world. Because here is the final layer. Here is the layer beneath all the other layers that we have been descending through. The layer that was hidden beneath the quantum layer, beneath the implicate order, beneath the ground of being itself. It is this. You are not alone in this. The quantum field is not a private experience. It is the shared ground of all consciousness. The awareness you find beneath your conditioned mind when you descend to the quantum layer. That awareness is not your private possession. It is the same awareness that every other conscious being finds when they descend to their quantum layer. The depth is shared. The ground is one. This is what the ancient wisdom traditions meant when they said that all beings are one. Not that individual differences do not matter. Not that the particular expression of each consciousness is not real and valuable, but that beneath the particular, beneath the surface of individual identity and individual experience, there is a shared ground, a common field, a single awareness expressing itself as the many. This is the layer beneath the quantum layer. This is the layer that quantum mechanics approaches but cannot fully describe, because it is not a fact about particles or fields or wave functions. It is a fact about the nature of consciousness itself. The fact that consciousness is not a private phenomenon happening inside individual skulls. Consciousness is the field, and the field is one. When you descend to the quantum layer of your own awareness, you are not descending into isolation. You are descending into connection, into the shared ground of all being, into the layer where the apparent separation between self and world, between self and other, between individual and universe, is revealed as a surface phenomenon. And from that layer, from that depth of shared ground, something becomes possible that is not possible from the surface. Real connection, not the surface connection of shared interests, or shared history, or shared story. The quantum connection of shared ground, the recognition that what you are at the depth is what everything else is. That the awareness looking out through your eyes is the same awareness looking out through every other pair of eyes. That the field that is you is the field that is everything. This is not a belief. This is not a spiritual aspiration. This is the logical consequence of what quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter, and what ancient wisdom found beneath the surface of self. The separation was always a surface. The unity was always the depth. And now that you have seen it, now that you have descended through the layers to this ground, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to the surface and pretend it is the whole thing. The membrane has thinned. The veil has lifted. The layer you have reached is not something you can fold back up and put away. What has been revealed cannot be re-hidden. This is where the transmission arrives at its final layer. Not a conclusion, because the depth does not conclude. Not an ending, because what you have found here does not end. But an integration, a way of carrying what has been revealed back into the surface world, not to escape the surface, but to move through it differently, to move through it from the depth. The integration is this. You now know that the surface is not the whole thing. You now know that beneath the solid, fixed, apparently independent world of ordinary experience, there is a quantum field of pure probability that participates with consciousness in the act of becoming real. You now know that this quantum field was mapped by ancient wisdom traditions long before science discovered it. You now know that beneath the quantum field is an implicate order of undivided wholeness, and beneath that is a ground of being that is the source of all apparent things. You now know that the awareness you find at the depth of your own consciousness is not separate from that ground. That you are the field. That the observer and the observed are one process. Carry this, not as a belief to hold, as a depth to inhabit. When the surface noise rises, when the conditioned mind fills with its familiar anxieties and projections and stories, you now know that there is a layer beneath it, a layer that is always here, a layer that is always stable, a layer that the noise of the surface cannot reach. When the world feels fixed and finished and resistant, when it seems like the surface is the whole thing and the depth is just a nice idea, you now know that this is the surface speaking. You now know that beneath the apparent fixity, the quantum field is always in motion, always available, always the infinite potential of this moment waiting to be collapsed into the particular reality of your next breath. When you feel alone, when the surface of individual identity feels like isolation, like separation, like the gap between self and world is unbridgeable, you now know that the gap is a surface phenomenon, that the depth is shared, that the ground of your being is the ground of all being, that the awareness you are is the awareness that is everything. You are not a surface dweller. You see the depth now. The veil is thinner than you think, and you have been seeing through it your entire life. Every moment of genuine presence you have ever experienced, every moment of deep connection, every moment of wonder at the beauty of the world, every moment when the noise stopped and the depth pressed through, every moment when you felt, however briefly, that the world was more than it appeared to be. Those were not accidents. Those were not flukes. Those were the quantum layer making itself known. Those were the field recognizing itself through you. Those were the moments when the membrane thinned and the depth became perceptible. You were always seeing through the veil. Now you know what you are seeing. There is a community of people who have descended to this layer, people who refuse to stop at the surface, people who have felt the thinness of the ordinary story about reality and have chosen to go deeper, people who have found the quantum layer not just as a concept, but as a lived experience, people who are practicing daily the descent from surface to depth, from conditioned noise to bare awareness, from the scattered surface of past and future to the quantum singularity of the present. If this transmission has reached something in you, if something in you recognized itself in what has been said here, then you are part of that community. You have always been part of it. Because the community is not defined by who knows about quantum mechanics or who has studied ancient wisdom. It is defined by the willingness to look beneath the surface, by the refusal to accept the outermost layer as the whole story, by the readiness to descend. You are ready. You have always been ready. The fact that you are here is the evidence. What layer did you reach in this transmission? What shifted for you? What did you find beneath the surface you came in with? Drop it in the comments, not because the words will capture it. The depth is always beyond words, but because the act of articulating what you found helps to anchor it, helps to make it real in the surface world, helps to build the bridge between the depth you touched and the life you are living. Type one word, the word that describes what you found at the deepest layer you reached today. One word is enough. One word from the depth is worth more than 1,000 words from the surface. And if this transmission reached someone you know, someone who has always sensed there was more beneath the surface, someone who has been living at the outermost layer and feeling the thinness of it, share it with them. When you pass this to someone who is ready to see beneath the surface, you are not just sending them a video. You are giving their awareness access to a layer it has been pressing against from below, perhaps for years. You are creating a shared depth between two consciousness fields that strengthens the collective ability to see what has always been here. Lift the veil for someone else. The depth is not diminished by being shared, it is deepened. Consider returning to this transmission in a quiet moment, early morning before the surface noise of the day rises, or in the stillness before sleep, when the deeper layers are most accessible. What you hear the second time will not be what you heard the first time, because you will be listening from a deeper layer than the one you arrived with. The quantum field does not become less infinite when more observers enter it. It becomes more itself. There is more beneath this layer. There is always more beneath this layer. Every transmission is a descent to a new depth. Every layer we lift reveals another layer beneath it. The archaeology of reality does not end. The veil does not stop lifting. The depth does not bottom out. Stay with this. Stay in the depth. Keep descending. The surface world will try to pull you back up. It always does. The conditioned mind will reassert itself. The noise will return. The familiar surface will present itself as the whole thing again. This is not failure. This is the nature of the surface. It is persistent. It is practiced. It has the weight of every habit and every social agreement and every cultural assumption behind it. But now you know it is a surface, and you know what is beneath it. And that knowing, once it has been genuinely touched, once the quantum layer has been genuinely experienced rather than just intellectually grasped, that knowing does not disappear. It may be covered by surface noise, but it is always there, always available, always the ground beneath the noise. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you can see through it. This was always beneath everything. You were always already here. The depth was never absent. The quantum layer was never inaccessible. The ground of being was never somewhere else. It was here. It has always been here. It will always be here. Beneath the surface of everything you thought you knew, beneath the quantum field of pure potential, beneath the implicate order of undivided wholeness, beneath the ground of being itself, there is this awareness, awake, present, whole. That is what you are. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. The next layer of this descent is already waiting. Your thoughts are not private explores the hidden network beneath your own mind, the layer where individual consciousness connects to something far larger than a single skull, and what that means for everything you believe you are thinking alone. That transmission belongs here, right after this one.